Welcome to the Bullpen. It's our monthly conversation about markets featuring Tommy Grisafi from Advanced Trading, of course, based at Mayville, North Dakota. Tommy, as always, we appreciate the chance to connect, and what a great time to sit and visit about markets when we're at this turn of the calendar and can look back on 2022 and get the crystal ball out and look ahead to the year ahead as well.
Yeah, it's been a wild year. I'm glad to be done with 22 for so many reasons. It just was an emotional year in markets. There was some key things that happened in North Dakota. In particular, one thing I want to point out, we had that auction where we had a whole section sell for $8,300 in Trail County. This is what you've seen happen to land prices is just incredible. When you flip that back to what happened to the stock market, in North Dakota, Minnesota, you'd seen some land prices double. In the stock market, you'd seen a 20% loss in the Dow Jones and S&P and up to a 35% loss in the NASDAQ. So when you look at stocks versus bonds, bond interest rates exploded. And then you look at the land prices. The big winner for 2022 was the land owner. Like the one analyst said, in the end, it's the farmers that'll be driving the Ferraris and Lamborghinis. And of course they are, because their tractors and combines cost a lot more than any sports car, you know.
So interest rates certainly on the way up. Will that moderate those land price increases? Because it seems like we've been just on a straight path forward on the upside.
I listened to an interesting podcast, and it wasn't my own podcast, and it wasn't one of yours, but it was a podcast. And I'd like all your listeners and watchers of this video to click on it and watch it. It's called Escaping 1980. It was done by a great group of people. You probably know them. Of course, you know everyone. You're Don Wick. But these folks did a great 7-part series about escaping 1980. And what's so interesting, Don, about listening to this podcast is it was recorded 2 years ago when interest rates were still low and the government was handing out a lot of money and we were on COVID lockdown. So to hear these analysts and professors and just a great team of people put this podcast together, they were talking about all the money given out, and that usually when that happens, there's inflation, but we weren't quite seeing inflation yet. Fast forward 2 years now, wow. Have we had inflation? Did we see it at the grocery store? Did we see it at the pump? Did we see it in our bills? Did we see it in healthcare? I received an email the other day saying my healthcare was going up another 9%. Inflation is all around us. Of course, it's coming down a little bit in the energy sector, but the lesson to be learned is, can you throw all this money and buy all these assets, and do they ever come down? Last year in 22, the big loser was probably crypto. Some people had some positions just absolutely horrible, and where if we were recording this a year ago, we'd be talking about Bitcoin at 55,000. I think it's at 16,000, and it hasn't moved 1,000 either way of that. Just now, upon this recording, that young man just went to court and pleaded not guilty. Sam, FTX founder, and I'd call him head Ponzi scheme artist. I don't know. Just make sure, Don, you don't ever interview a kid worth $20 billion sitting in shorts and a t-shirt and take them serious. I guess there's something for putting on a dress shirt and a sport coat once in a while and actually following the rules. Some wild stuff happened in crypto, and that came to an end. The stock market came to an end. We had this lost decade of record low interest rates that came to an end. Of course, we still have high commodity prices relative to history. And we're sitting in a good spot in North Dakota because we can grow so many unique crops, Don.
With all these things happening in the economic spectrum, when you're talking about recession, interest rates, what's this mean when we push back from Joe Farmer's perspective? How does this that macroeconomy type story mean for them on the farm?
Well, facts, not Tommy thinks. If you need to borrow money and you go to the bank, I sit and work with the good folks at First State Bank over there in Mayville. If you go into that bank, operating is going to be a lot higher than it was in previous years. For some people, maybe grandma who has a lot of cash sitting around, they can earn 4, maybe even 5%. So people with cash can earn interest, something only old people like you and I remember. Young people don't quite remember that you would actually put your money in a bank and they would send you money. So the value of a dollar is so important. What's it mean to people in 2022? For young people, they're coming into a record high cost production. Older farmers are coming into a record high cost production also, but they have that land. And with that land ownership and equity, that's enough value to pretty much get them to the finish line. In my opinion, even if land prices were to lose 25%, they'd really just be giving back what they just went up last year. So in 2023, we're going to have a record high cost production. Labor costs are very high. Everything around you is going up. And just by the way the market's acted today, the market's had a big sell-off. So if markets continue to sell off, your cost of production will be set here in the next few months. We don't quite have crop insurance. If you ask me, Tommy, what's your biggest concern? We have to get through January and February. We do not have a crop insurance floor yet for the American farmer. Brazil's right behind us, putting in a record crop. And by all looks that I can see, it looks like a couple more rains and they're going to produce those bushels. So some headwinds coming in. The secret, if you want to know the secret for watching this video, all the bullish news is out, Don. There's nothing out there you or I or anyone else knows that's like, oh, but wait, there's more. Natural gas is at 10-month lows today. Crude oil's down 350. The big energy inflation bubble might be over. And really, to me, grains are just energy, just bundled up in a cute little kernel, Don.
Very true. One of the big stories, of course, this past year is Russia invading Ukraine. It fundamentally changed the export channels that we had this past year. Obviously, they're still moving product out of the Black Sea, but it has changed things. Is that a long-term situation as far as how it impacted the international trade situation? Are we going to see that issue moving forward?
That's a great question. I don't know when the war is going to end, the conflict, but I do know this. Countries all over the world have gotten a chance to plant three crops now and make a really nice profit. There was things happening in the world that had made grain prices higher before that. But the Ukraine war was the gas on the fire and the match lit to get that final rocket taking off of grain prices. And what it did was it made people all over the world get back in the grain business. So now everyone's in the grain business. And what'll happen if and when, and I do believe in the next few years, Ukraine will get back into more grain production. They're going to need help. They're going to need equipment. They've taken apart a lot of their equipment or it's been ruined. There was a lot of shells that have hit a lot of fields. There's going to need to be a lot of cleanup. But don't forget, 15% of the world's best ground is sitting right in that conflict, that area. And it's so important. Now, because technology and other things, they're planting they're planting ground that's not as good as that, but they're still getting bushels. So to answer your question, a ton of production acreage has went into production. And even if you say, oh, I looked it up, there wasn't that much more acres or hectares planted around the world. When commodity prices go up, it allows research and technology to be developed and it gives the money to the ag sector. Look at how the ag stocks did last year. Companies like ADM, they did very well. Yeah. And they handled that bushel. So I believe, in my opinion of opinions, we're going to produce more with less, but yet there's still even more ground that went into production. When it clicks, when Mother Nature and geopolitics all start to cooperate, we're going to go from not having enough to having too much. And if you listen to that podcast series, they probably don't even know I'm plugging their podcast. They're going to know when they see the downloads. It explains everything that happened in the late 70s and 80s. I don't think you remember Dr. Earl Butz. You're too much of a young man there. Did you ever meet Dr. Earl Butz?
I saw him speak at a couple of different occasions. Yeah.
Oh, you're telling people your age. He was a character. I mean, he did some things that are still affecting farmers today. What's that?
Fence row to fence row.
Yeah, he said a couple other things too. You guys can Google it, all right? We can't talk about it on this show. This is PG. But seriously, this podcast explained what happened in the late 70s and 80s. I felt by listening to it that I had got to go back in time, that I had got to sit in a classroom and get educated without having to take the test. Will history repeat itself? I don't know. One of the things that came out of the 80s is that our lending standards are much stronger. Our debt to income ratios are so much better. It would take an incredible downturn in agricultural prices to get a lot of people in trouble. And I believe in the 80s, a lot of people got in trouble really quickly. And that kind of created a cannonball effect, a domino effect, as we like to say. So things are a lot different than the 80s. We've learned some lessons. We have a higher standard. We've learned things from Dodd-Frank, from the housing crisis. Do I think houses will just collapse and it'll be terrible? No, but if you go get a mortgage, it's 8%, and that's it could be $500, $1,000 more to your mortgage. Now, that's a mortgage on a house. If you were to borrow a bunch of money against land, it's very expensive to borrow money right now, Don.
Yeah, no doubt. You talk about the margins that our growers are dealing with going into this 23 growing season. Is that going to impact the acreage mix that we see in this area?
I think North Dakota could still have an interesting acreage mix when it comes to canola, sunflowers, and all the things that the Ukraine is lacking. Of course, we have our edible beans. We're going to have our normal standard sugar beet acreage. The one thing that was lacking in 2022, and you and I know because we did the boots on the ground crop tour, how much corn was planted in North Dakota? There's a phenomenal cash bid in corn. And of course, to your acreage mix, I'll ask you a question. Do you really think all these crushing plants will open? Since I've been in North Dakota for 7 years, I've heard 20 headlines of new things, and I've only seen 2 new things open. Back to you, sir.
Very good question. It's these are big dollar type projects, so it'll be interesting to see who's got the intestinal fortitude to make that go forward. And really, the Grand Forks project, I think we're still looking to see where the financing is going to come from on that one.
And when they do open, the Red River Farm Network will be there.
Yeah,
reporting agriculture's business.
You got that right, Tommy. Anything else we should be looking at as you look at that crystal ball going into the new year, Tommy?
The crystal ball. I think that we have some headwinds. We still have some time to lock in profit. I'd like to see people a little bit more forward sold and a lot more forward protected. Once you get crop insurance in a few months, this tone and conversation will change. What would be very bad is if the markets break hard and go below your cost production here in the next few months. We could be multiple years of below your cost production, and we will erode the equity. The way I'd like to say it and finish it off is the markets and the United States government have recently given you a lot of money. It's now the market's job to start taking that money out of your pocket. And you're going to have to be a fighter to stop the market from doing it. If you don't believe me, go back and study history. Everyone knows agriculture has ebbs and flows. We've just come through a wonderful time, but I do have a feeling it's ending.
Well, we always appreciate the insight. We'll talk again in a month, Tommy.
Thanks, Don.
Again, thank you for joining us for our monthly update on market news with Tommy Grisafi from Advanced Trading. Until our next edition of The Bullpen, I'm Don Wick here on the Red River Farm Network.